He never saw it coming. Charles Whittaker, a successful 59-year-old man and the last surviving patriarch of his wealthy family, thought he had finally found true love. It was unexpected. A young woman with an alluring charm who swept him off his feet and into the promise of a new beginning. But within just 2 days of saying, "I do," that promise would turn to tragedy. What if the person you trusted most in the world, the one who held your hand and whispered promises of forever, was secretly plotting your downfall? And what if that same person had done it all before and would do it again? Welcome to Michael's Story Hub. Thank you, viewers, and especially my subscribers, for your support as we continue bringing you daily tales and untold true crime stories. Let us know the city you're watching from in the comments. We love to hear from you. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more gripping tales. Charles Whittaker, 59, was a man who once moved mountains in his life. Not in business, but in preserving his family's vast estate. Generations of Whittakers had lived and thrived on the sprawling land Charles inherited. His days were consumed with managing the estate, ensuring it maintained its legacy, and safeguarding it for future generations. But this legacy came at a cost. Over the years, Charles became more isolated, and his personal life dwindled. The untimely death of his wife and other family members left him with a hollow feeling that no amount of wealth or land could fill. With only his daughter Megan left as family, Charles found himself in unfamiliar territory. Though he had financial security and a life of comfort, he felt strangely adrift, burdened by a loneliness that deepened over the years. He realized that beyond Megan's occasional visits and the superficial interactions at social events, he had no one to share his day-to-day life with. The holidays, once vibrant with family, had grown quiet, spent alone in his large, echoing house. Though he seldom admitted it, Charles secretly longed for companionship, someone to share his life with, and bring back the warmth that had faded with time. Despite this yearning, Charles was cautious. Life had taught him to be wary, especially with younger women. He saw himself as an older man, far beyond the age where youthful romance or new love felt natural. The idea of being with someone significantly younger felt out of character for him, more like something from a novel than real life. Occasionally, young women showed him attention, but he brushed it off, assuming they were misguided or had ulterior motives. His dignity and self-respect kept him grounded, and he never allowed himself to indulge in fantasies of romance with anyone significantly younger. Then, unexpectedly, Charles met Olivia Carter. An epitome of charm and mystery at 22, Olivia was everything a confident young woman might be: charismatic, attentive, and poised. But Olivia's confidence was calculated, and she hid a dark past beneath her graceful exterior. Born into a life of struggle, she learned early on that the world offered her nothing unless she took it by force or deceit. Over the past 3 years, Olivia had perfected her strategy of targeting wealthy older men who were lonely and vulnerable. With each encounter, Olivia tailored her persona to match her target's desires and weaknesses. Charles, her newest target, had no idea that Olivia had already left behind a trail of heartbreak, financial ruin, and even death. Under various aliases, she had ensnared 4 other men, each time assuming a new identity to avoid detection. Every marriage ended in tragedy, with Olivia walking away wealthier and none the wiser to the outside world. To everyone else, Olivia appeared to be a loving and devoted young wife, but behind closed doors, she was cold, calculating, and ruthless, interested only in the financial security her targets provided. It was a breezy summer evening at a local community fundraiser, one of those events Charles occasionally attended to maintain social connections. He wasn't looking for romance, let alone with a woman decades his junior. As he sipped his wine and surveyed the room, he barely noticed Olivia at first. But Olivia noticed him. She watched from across the room, observing the quiet dignity he carried and the subtle signs of his inner life. The way he politely laughed with acquaintances, but seemed disconnected, lost in thought. He held himself with grace, yet Olivia could sense the hint of isolation in his eyes, the way he scanned the room with a quiet yearning. Olivia's practiced eye immediately identified Charles as the perfect target. When she approached, she was casual and disarming, making him feel at ease. Her words were friendly, her tone respectful, and her demeanor non-threatening. She was careful, knowing that overt interest might put him off. Instead, she made light conversation, weaving in humor and attentiveness. Charles found himself enjoying the interaction more than he expected, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. There was a warmth to her, a charm he hadn't experienced in years. But despite the initial spark, Charles remained wary. Part of him was flattered, but he brushed it off, attributing her attention to friendliness rather than genuine interest. Olivia, however, was prepared. She had done this before and was skilled in the art of persuasion. Over the next few weeks, she began appearing at more community gatherings, always managing to cross paths with Charles in ways that seemed coincidental, but were meticulously planned. She learned more about him, his interests, his past, and his quirks. Olivia paid close attention to his words and reactions, noting what made him laugh, what made him tense, and what softened his skepticism. She found ways to compliment him in ways that felt sincere, gradually disarming his skepticism. Olivia wasn't overbearing. Instead, she provided gentle reminders of her presence, small, thoughtful gestures that left a lasting impression on Charles. Gradually, Charles began to let his guard down. Olivia would call him late at night, engaging him in long, meaningful conversations that stretched into the early hours. She asked about his life, his dreams, and his regrets. Charles found himself sharing stories he hadn't spoken of in years, moments from his youth, his ambitions, the sacrifices he had made to preserve the Whitaker family estate, and the loneliness that had come as a result. Each time he revealed a part of himself, Olivia listened with rapt attention, making him feel valued and understood. It was as if she was peeling away the layers he had wrapped around his heart, breaking down the walls he had so carefully built. Olivia's attentiveness went beyond words. She understood the power of small actions. She would bring him his favorite tea, surprise him with a thoughtful card or a bouquet on an ordinary day, or show up with books she knew he'd enjoy. She listened as he discussed his thoughts on the characters and themes, engaging with him in ways that made him feel intellectually and emotionally appreciated. Slowly, Charles began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who truly understood him, someone who saw past his age and wealth. With each act of kindness, his hesitation faded, replaced by a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Olivia's presence filled his once empty home with laughter and companionship, transforming his days into moments of shared joy and warmth. Except for the first time in decades, Charles found himself falling impregnated by her presence. Against all his cautious instincts for the charm and allure of a woman who seemed to care for him deeply, slowly, the boundaries he'd set around his heart began to blur. But while Charles saw only the blossoming of a new love, Olivia saw something entirely different. A door opening to a life of financial security built on the trust and vulnerability of a man who believed in her. For her, this relationship was nothing more than another scheme, a calculated plan designed to gain access to Charles's wealth. As Charles fell deeper under her spell, Olivia continued her performance, knowing exactly when to push forward and when to hold back. Each move was crafted to pull him further into her grip. In his heart, Charles knew he was taking a risk, but he convinced himself it was worth it. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream of a future filled with companionship and love, unaware that behind Olivia's warm smile and attentive words was a woman who had no intention of keeping any promises she made. Behind every kind word, gentle smile, and attentive gesture, Olivia's true intentions revealed themselves. Charles had fallen for the woman he thought she was, but Olivia's actions were nothing more than a meticulously planned performance. She was a master of psychological manipulation, wielding Charles's vulnerabilities like tools. From the beginning, Olivia had carefully assessed his emotional needs and weaknesses. She recognized that Charles, despite his genuine companionship and a sense of security, she played to this desire with precision, knowing she could pull him further into her web by appealing to his emotions. Olivia cleverly painted herself as a woman of modest means, with simple tastes and a straightforward approach to life. She knew that any overt display of greed or interest in his wealth would raise Charles's defenses. Instead, she focused on qualities that would appeal to him: humility, admiration for his wisdom, and gratitude for the small things in life. Olivia often spoke about her humble beginnings, sharing carefully crafted stories that made Charles believe she was someone who had struggled but managed to keep her integrity. She expressed sincere admiration for his accomplishments, emphasizing how much she valued his life experiences and insights. To further gain his trust, Olivia positioned herself as his rock, always there to listen to his concerns and provide comfort. She became his confidant, encouraging him to share his innermost fears and doubts. When Charles expressed worries about his health or his ability to preserve the estate for future generations, Olivia was quick to offer comforting words, telling him she admired his strength and resilience. She never pushed him too far, always maintaining the perfect balance between attentive and unobtrusive. By making him feel emotionally supported, she created a dependency that allowed her to control the pace of the relationship and deepen his trust. With his trust secured, Olivia slowly turned her attention to Charles' finances. She knew she had to tread carefully. Charles was no fool when it came to money. Generations of wealth had taught him to be prudent, and any overt attempts to access his funds could raise suspicion. So Olivia took her time, slowly planting seeds that would allow her to gain control without raising red flags. She began by offering small financial advice under the guise of helping him simplify his life in retirement. She would casually mention that he deserved to enjoy his success and should consider consolidating his assets for peace of mind. As their relationship grew more serious, Olivia started discussing future plans, as she made it seem as though she was fully committed to a life with him, talking about long-term goals and building a life together. She suggested that they make decisions as a team, which led to conversations about estate planning, insurance, and other financial matters. Olivia gradually hinted that it would be wise for Charles to consider making her the beneficiary of his estate, as they were now building a life together. She framed it as a practical step, an expression of their commitment to each other. Charles, caught up in the idea of a shared future, began to see the logic in her suggestions. He had no other close family members to support beyond Megan, and with Olivia's encouragement, he began making changes to his estate. Little by little, Olivia was written into his life insurance policies and financial plans, ensuring that she would inherit his wealth. Each step was carefully calculated, with Olivia offering just the right amount of reassurance and affection to make him feel comfortable with these decisions. Unknown to Charles, Olivia's intentions were far from genuine. He was not her first mark, nor was he likely to be her last. Over the past 3 years, Olivia had perfected a scheme that she repeated with precision. Her method was consistent: study the target, insert herself into his life with patience and charm, and slowly weave herself into his finances. Once her name was on the necessary documents, the relationship would take a sudden turn. Charles was now the 5th man Olivia had ensnared in this way. The 4 men who came before him were eerily similar in profile: wealthy, older, and often without close family to protect them. After each marriage, a tragic accident would befall her spouse. Heart attacks, sudden illnesses, and unexpected falls claimed the lives of her previous victims. Olivia would emerge each time as the grieving widow, devastated by her loss. only to quietly claim her inheritance and disappear, moving on to the next city with a new identity and a fresh target. This time, Olivia's plan was even more sinister. She knew Charles had health issues and was on regular medication. While she had previously relied on accidents or sudden illnesses, with Charles, she saw an opportunity to expedite her plan using his own health against him. Olivia began to gradually interfere with his medication, replacing his pills with something harmless but ineffective, knowing that this would gradually weaken his condition. She kept up her loving wife act, all the while watching his health decline with cold, calculated patience. Her aim was to ensure that when Charles finally succumbed, it would appear as a natural progression of his health issues, leaving no suspicion for authorities or family members to investigate. As Charles grew weaker, Olivia continued to play the role of the devoted wife, ensuring he remained unaware of her treachery. To everyone around them, she seemed like his loyal partner, standing by his side through his health challenges. But behind closed doors, she was orchestrating his demise with chilling indifference, waiting for the day when his wealth would finally be repaid. Olivia's plan was nearly complete, and she had every reason to believe she would walk away unscathed once again. But fate had other plans, and Olivia's dark history would soon catch up to her in ways she never anticipated. And respect, and she left him little time to dwell on his doubts. Charles hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision before him. He was an older man, with a life that had long been shaped by independence. Marriage was something he hadn't seriously considered in years, and the idea of saying yes seemed surreal. In that moment, he confessed his concerns, sharing that he couldn't give her children and that at his age, he was unsure if he could fulfill the role she might expect in a traditional marriage. But Olivia, with perfect timing, reassured him, saying she wanted only his companionship, that having a family wasn't her priority, and that he alone was enough for her. This heartfelt response eased his concerns, and he began to believe that perhaps, after years of solitude, this was his chance at happiness. A chance he didn't want to let slip away. After a pause that felt like an eternity, Charles smiled, his heart filled with cautious hope, and agreed to become her husband. The wedding was a small, private affair, exactly as Olivia had intended. She assured him that she wanted something intimate, something that was just the two of them. Charles, somewhat relieved, appreciated this simplicity. Olivia explained that she had no living family, sharing a vague story about tragic losses, and Charles accepted it without question, seeing it as part of the reason she was drawn to him, a fellow soul who had also known heartache and loss. The ceremony was held at a quaint chapel, attended only by a few close friends from Charles's past. The atmosphere was warm yet bittersweet, as Charles felt a mix of excitement and a lingering nervousness. But with Olivia's hand in his, he dismissed his doubts, telling himself that this was the new beginning he had been waiting for. After the wedding, Olivia dove fully into her role as the devoted wife, meticulously creating an image of affection and support. She moved into Charles's home, filling the space with her presence, attending to his needs, and making him feel cherished. She took on small tasks around the house, cooked his favorite meals, and even surprised him with breakfast in bed. Every morning she greeted him with a gentle smile, asking about his plans and making sure he felt valued. Charles was captivated by this new phase of life, embracing the companionship he had longed for. In these early days, Olivia's attentiveness was constant. She listened intently when Charles spoke, and seemed genuinely invested in his happiness. She encouraged him to take it easy, reminding him that he deserved to enjoy his retirement after so many years of hard work. She pampered him in small ways, bringing his favorite teas and books, indulging him with quiet evenings together. For the first time in years, Charles felt as if he had a partner who understood him, someone who would be there through thick and thin. He was unaware that Olivia's kindness had a calculated purpose. Her care was a performance, each gesture meant to deepen his dependence on her. Behind the scenes, however, Olivia was setting her final plan into motion. As she played the part of the caring wife, she began to alter Charles's medication, gradually replacing his heart pills with harmless substitutes. She moved carefully, ensuring that Charles wouldn't notice any immediate change in his routine. Her goal was to weaken his health over time so that, when the moment came, his passing would appear to be a tragic but natural event. Olivia went through each step with precision, confident that her strategy was foolproof. Every day she watched Charles' health subtly decline, feeling only satisfaction as she saw her plan nearing its climax. 2 days into their marriage, the idyllic facade Olivia had created was shattered in an instant. It was during a quiet evening dinner at home. Charles sat across from Olivia, chatting about plans for the future, laughing about a memory he had just shared. Olivia watched him with a calm expression, occasionally nodding, but her mind was elsewhere, mentally counting down the minutes, waiting for the signs she had anticipated. And then, suddenly, Charles' face paled. He gripped his chest, confusion and panic filling his eyes. Olivia's face registered concern, but inside she was calm. She stood up, feigning panic, rushing to his side and placing a steady hand on his shoulder as he struggled for breath. He gasped, trying to understand what was happening to him, looking to her with a plea for help. Olivia, still playing the role of the panicked wife, quickly called for emergency services, her voice steady, but with a hint of desperation that made her act all the more convincing. As they waited for help, Olivia continued her act, murmuring words of comfort, reassuring him that he would be fine, even as she knew exactly what was happening. When the paramedics arrived, she held his hand tightly, following them to the ambulance with all the devotion she could muster. On the way to the hospital, Charles's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breaths grew shallow, and his grip on her hand weakened. Olivia maintained her mask of concern, but inwardly she knew the outcome was certain. By the time they reached the hospital, Charles had passed away. Olivia put on a show of grief, her demeanor a mix of shock and sorrow that convinced everyone around her. To the doctors and nurses, she was a devastated wife who had just lost the love of her life. She remained in the waiting area, her head in her hands, her expression vacant. But in her mind, she was already calculating her next steps. She knew that within a few days the necessary paperwork would be processed, and she would inherit everything Charles had left behind. Her plans had succeeded yet again, but Olivia was unaware that this time her carefully crafted plan would not go as smoothly as she expected. Charles' sudden death had left unanswered questions in the minds of those who knew him best. As Olivia prepared to step into her new life, she would soon realize that Charles' story was far from over, and the consequences of her actions were closer than she could ever have anticipated. Megan Whitaker had always been her father's protector, even if Charles didn't always see it that way. In her late 20s, Megan had chosen a career as an FBI agent, driven by a desire for justice and a natural skepticism that served her well on the job. She was sharp, instinctive, and had an unwavering sense of duty, traits that often extended into her personal life, especially when it came to her family. While she and her father had grown somewhat distant over the years, Megan still felt a strong sense of responsibility for Charles. She understood that his life had been filled with sacrifices, and that his focus on preserving their generational legacy had sometimes left little room for close family ties. Despite this, Megan deeply respected her father's resilience and independence, and she had always wished for him to find genuine happiness. When Charles introduced her to Olivia, however, Megan's instincts immediately went on high alert. She had always known her father to be level-headed and cautious, let alone with someone so much younger. Yet Olivia's charm seemed to have taken hold of Charles in a way that made Megan uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Though she tried to keep her concerns to herself, not wanting to upset her father or drive a wedge between them, Megan reminded herself that Charles deserved a chance at happiness, even if his choice felt unconventional. Still, Megan couldn't ignore the nagging doubts. Olivia's sudden appearance in Charles's life seemed too convenient, her attentiveness too calculated. Whenever Megan visited, she noted Olivia's overly attentive behavior, her way of always being present, always just close enough to monitor Charles' interactions with others. Olivia's charm was undeniable, but to Megan it came across as too rehearsed, too polished. She sensed an underlying manipulation in Olivia's words and actions, even if Charles was blind to it. Whenever Megan tried to question Olivia about her past or ask her about her family, Olivia would deflect, offering vague responses that only fueled her suspicions. But for her father's sake, Megan held back her full concerns, opting to watch and wait. Hoping her instincts were wrong, when Charles passed away suddenly, just days after the wedding, Megan was overcome with shock and grief. She couldn't understand how her father, who had seemed relatively healthy despite his heart condition, could be gone so abruptly. His passing felt too sudden, too final, and the circumstances left her unsettled. As she went through the motions of dealing with the aftermath, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her father's death than anyone was acknowledging. She noticed Olivia's behavior at the hospital and during the subsequent days, her calculated expressions of grief, her well-timed sighs of sorrow. To most, Olivia seemed like a grieving wife, but to Megan, her actions felt more like a performance. Driven by her instincts, Megan decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew that pursuing an investigation might strain her relationship with Olivia and potentially upset her father's close friends. But her gut told her that something was wrong. In her line of work, she had learned to trust her instincts, and this was no exception. Without delay, Megan requested a toxicology report, determined to leave no stone unturned. She understood the potential for pushback. Her father's death had been officially recorded as natural, and her actions might seem intrusive. But Megan couldn't let her doubts go unanswered, even if it meant standing alone in her suspicions. The toxicology report was a turning point for Megan. She had been anxious about the results, both hoping to find something that explained her father's sudden death and dreading the possibility of uncovering something darker. When she opened the report, her suspicions solidified into an undeniable reality. The report indicated that Charles had died from an overdose of his heart medication, a dose significantly higher than what was prescribed. Megan felt a wave of grief and fury wash over her. She knew her father well enough to be certain that Charles would never accidentally overdose. Charles had always been meticulous, almost to a fault, about his health routines. Megan knew that her father's disciplined nature ruled out any chance of negligence. This overdose was no accident. In Megan's mind, there was now only one possible explanation. Someone had tampered with his medication, and there was only one person who had both access and motive: Olivia. As Megan grappled with this revelation, she recalled every instance where Olivia had tended to Charles, every meal she had cooked, every seemingly innocent gesture. She remembered how attentive Olivia had been, how she had played the perfect role of the caring wife, right down to organizing Charles's medication with an eager smile. Megan's heart broke as she realized that each gesture had likely been a calculated step in a larger, sinister plan. She couldn't help but feel a deep sorrow for her father, who had unknowingly fallen into the hands of a woman with no remorse. She checked with her father's banker, who shared details about the changes Charles had made prior to his death, changes that made Olivia the beneficiary of his finances once he was gone, including his life insurance. Right there, Megan saw motive. Now convinced of Olivia's involvement in her father's death, Megan was more determined than ever to bring the truth to light. But instinct alone wasn't enough. She needed hard evidence to ensure that Olivia would be held accountable. Using her resources as an FBI agent, Megan began a full investigation into Olivia's past. She traced back every detail she could find, determined to build a comprehensive case against her. Her investigation led her through layers of aliases, as Olivia had gone to great lengths to bury her past and conceal her identity. But Megan was relentless, and piece by piece, the woman she thought was her father's wife became a stranger with a trail of deception. Megan's digging uncovered a disturbing pattern that chilled her to the core. In every city Olivia had lived, she had left behind a trail of broken lives, lives always centered around wealthy older men who bore a haunting resemblance to her father. Katie dismounted from her bike, financially independent, often isolated, and yearning for companionship. The pieces of Olivia's past fit together like a dark puzzle. Megan discovered that Olivia had changed her name multiple times, and that she had been married before. Not once or twice, but 4 times. In each instance, her husbands had been older, wealthy men, all of whom had died suddenly not long after she became the primary beneficiary of their estates. The pattern was unmistakable. Olivia would enter these men's lives, create a facade of love and devotion, then use their vulnerabilities to gain control over their finances before orchestrating their deaths. With each new piece of evidence, Megan's determination grew stronger. She began to feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not only to her father, but also to the other men who had fallen victim to Olivia's scheme. She knew that without her intervention, Olivia might continue her charade, moving on to new cities, new aliases, and new victims. Her father's tragic fate was no longer an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of cruelty and manipulation. The idea of her father being just another name in a string of victims was almost unbearable, but it fueled Megan's resolve. She was determined to end Olivia's cycle of deceit once and for all. With the evidence mounting, Megan reached a crucial turning point. She understood now with grim clarity that Olivia had never loved her father. Everything she had done, from the initial seduction to the sweet attentive gestures, had been part of a calculated scheme to gain control over Charles's wealth. Her father had been used, manipulated, and ultimately discarded. The full weight of Olivia's betrayal hit Megan like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a single act of cruelty, it was a pattern of manipulation crafted over years. Olivia's entire life seemed built on the suffering and exploitation of vulnerable men. Each one of them lured into her orbit by the same charm that had initially fooled Charles. Realizing the depth of Olivia's manipulation stirred a fierce resolve within Megan. She couldn't bring her father back, but she could make sure Olivia would face justice. Her heart was heavy, but her mind was clear. This was not only about avenging her father, but also about preventing other men from suffering the same fate. Megan gathered every piece of evidence, each small clue that painted a picture of Olivia's true nature. She compiled records, contacted authorities in the cities where Olivia had previously lived, and connected with the families of her previous victims. Her investigation revealed stories eerily similar to her father's. A whirlwind romance, a quick marriage, followed by a sudden and tragic death, each one leaving Olivia wealthier and ready to move on to her next target. Armed with the truth, Megan prepared herself to face Olivia and expose her deception. She was no longer simply a grieving daughter. She was now an investigator on a mission, intent on seeing justice served. Olivia's carefully constructed world began to unravel when she sensed that her freedom was slipping away. The almost invisible cues told her she was being watched, scrutinized more closely than she had anticipated. She noticed the increased presence of law enforcement in her neighborhood, the quiet but pointed questions from acquaintances, and the way Megan's eyes seemed to follow her whenever they crossed paths. Olivia's usual confidence was beginning to crack, and for the first time she felt an undeniable urge to flee. She had escaped before, slipping out of lives and cities without leaving a trace, and she was confident she could do it again. Determined to vanish before authorities could close in, Olivia meticulously mapped out an exit plan. She withdrew cash in small amounts over the course of several days, packed a small suitcase, and erased any traces of her digital footprint. She planned to leave under the cover of night, taking nothing but the essentials and enough forged documents to create a new identity elsewhere. Olivia believed she could disappear once more, re-emerging in a new city to begin her life anew. But what she didn't know was that Megan was already several steps ahead of her. Megan, anticipating Olivia's attempt to escape, had discreetly alerted the authorities to monitor Olivia's movements. She knew Olivia's pattern, her tendency to vanish as soon as things grew tense, and she wasn't about to let her slip away again. Megan had rallied the necessary support, involving colleagues and using her FBI connections to place Olivia under close surveillance. The authorities monitored her every move, waiting for the moment she would make a break for it. Finally, that night arrived, and as Olivia attempted to slip out of town, a dramatic chase ensued. The streets lit up with sirens as law enforcement vehicles pursued her, the sound echoing through the quiet night as she weaved through the city in a desperate bid for freedom. But Megan's meticulous planning paid off, and after a tense pursuit, Olivia was finally apprehended. Her last attempt at escape was thwarted. When Olivia was captured, she wore an expression of cold defiance, attempting to maintain a sense of control despite her capture. She was escorted in handcuffs, her usual charm and composure replaced with a quiet rage. Megan watched from a distance, her eyes narrowed with restrained fury as she locked onto the woman who had brought so much pain to her father and to others like him. Standing across from her in that moment, Megan felt a surge of conflicting emotions: grief, anger, and a bittersweet satisfaction in knowing that justice was finally within reach. Olivia met Megan's gaze, her expression devoid of remorse, as if daring Megan to follow through with the trial. But Megan held steady, her face resolute, determined to bring her down, not only for her father, but for every man Olivia had deceived, manipulated, and left shattered in her wake. This confrontation was brief, a single intense moment of silence that spoke louder than words. Megan's mind was set. She would see this through to the end, ensuring that Olivia faced the full consequences of her actions. No more aliases, no more escapes. This time, Olivia would face the truth in front of everyone she had wronged. The trial that followed was nothing short of gripping. Olivia, ever the performer, tried to maintain an air of innocence, casting herself as a grieving widow wrongfully accused. In her opening statements, she portrayed herself as the victim of a tragic misunderstanding, insisting that her love for Charles had been genuine and that his death was nothing more than a heart-wrenching accident. She spoke with practiced sorrow, her voice low and steady, hoping to sway the jury with her carefully crafted demeanor. But the prosecution was relentless, presenting a case that dismantled Olivia's web of lies piece by piece. Megan attended every day of the trial, her presence a constant reminder of the lives Olivia had destroyed. She listened as prosecutors presented the damning evidence she had worked tirelessly to uncover: the toxicology report, the manipulated will, and the forged signatures that pointed to Olivia's calculated scheme. They revealed how she had gained access to Charles's medication, altering it to create the illusion of a natural decline. Art was silent as these revelations were laid out, each piece of evidence casting a darker shadow over Olivia's claims of innocence. But it wasn't just Charles's story that filled the courtroom. As the trial progressed, families of Olivia's previous victims came forward, each with stories that mirrored Charles's tragic fate. Mothers, daughters, and sisters of her former husbands recounted the heartbreak they had endured, the suspicious circumstances under which their loved ones had passed, and the eerie similarities that tied each case together. Testimonies from these families painted a chilling portrait of Olivia's pattern of manipulation, each story confirming the disturbing pattern that Megan had discovered. Men who, like Charles, had believed in Olivia's love, only to be used, discarded, and left as collateral in her ruthless pursuit of wealth. Olivia attempted to maintain her composure, but as each witness spoke, the mask began to crack. The testimonies of these families left a profound impact on the jury, who saw firsthand the emotional wreckage left in Olivia's wake. The prosecution emphasized her cold calculation, her ability to transform herself into whatever persona each victim needed, only to strip them of their dignity, their resources, and ultimately their lives. Piece by piece, the prosecution dismantled Olivia's defense, revealing her history of deception and highlighting the psychological manipulation she had employed to ensnare her victims. In a final blow, the prosecution presented documentation of Olivia's aliases, demonstrating how she had created multiple identities, changed names, and fabricated pasts to stay undetected. The courtroom fell silent as each alias was read aloud, each identity a ghostly reminder of a life she had ruined. The weight of her actions hung in the air, and for the first time, Olivia's composure faltered. The carefully constructed veneer of innocence gave way to glimpses of the cold, calculating woman who had spent years perfecting the art of deception. The trial reached its climax with closing statements that left the jury with no doubt about Olivia's intentions. The prosecution made one final appeal to justice, emphasizing the need to protect others from falling victim to her manipulations. The families of her victims watched intently, waiting to see if the system would finally bring closure to the pain they had endured. As the jury returned with their verdict, Megan felt a wave of relief and closure, knowing that her father's voice and the voices of so many others had been heard. Olivia was found guilty on multiple counts, each charge a testament to the lives she had taken and the trust she had betrayed. Her attempt to flee, her endless fabrications, and her repeated patterns of deceit had all led to this moment. Megan knew that her father's legacy would not end in silence, nor would it be tainted by the lies Olivia had woven. Instead, Charles's memory would stand as a testament to resilience and justice, a reminder that truth prevails even in the darkest of schemes. As Olivia was led away, Megan finally allowed herself to grieve, knowing that her fight had given her father and so many others the justice they deserved. The day of sentencing was a defining moment for Megan. After the long months of investigation, trial, and intense courtroom testimonies, justice had finally been served. Olivia was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. This ensured that she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars, unable to harm anyone else or continue her cycle of manipulation and deception. Her life of lies, manipulation, and greed had come to an end, replaced by a prison sentence that matched the depth of her crimes. Watching her led away, Megan felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a feeling she hadn't known since her father's death. Charles's untimely passing had once seemed like a tragedy with no end in sight, but now, seeing Olivia finally face the consequences, Megan felt a small but significant sense of peace. Megan knew this wasn't just about Olivia being punished. It was about Charles's memory being honored. Her father's legacy wouldn't be tainted by Olivia's deceit. Instead, Charles would be remembered as a strong, independent man who had raised a daughter willing to fight for him. Olivia's sentencing symbolized more than just punishment. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the pursuit of truth. In that moment, Megan felt her father's presence with her, as if Charles were finally at rest, knowing that his story would be one of justice rather than betrayal. As she reflected on the months that had passed, Megan couldn't help but think of the broader implications of Olivia's actions. She hadn't just targeted her father. She had preyed on a vulnerability shared by so many: loneliness, a longing for connection, and the need for companionship. Olivia had exploited these needs, using them as tools to manipulate and destroy lives for her own personal gain. Megan thought about the many men like Charles who had fallen victim to such predators, deceived by people who saw their kindness and generosity as weaknesses to be taken advantage of. This journey had opened Megan's eyes to the harsh reality of how individuals like Olivia operated, slipping into people's lives and using their trust against them. As the story of Charles's life and Olivia's downfall comes to an end, we're left with important questions that resonate far beyond this single story. How well do we really know the people close to us? Could we detect a hidden agenda in someone we love? Would we know the signs of manipulation if they were right in front of us? These questions are worth pondering, as they remind us to stay vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to ensure that we're safeguarding ourselves and our loved ones. Charles' story is a powerful reminder of the importance of awareness in our relationships and the need to protect our hearts and minds. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe for more life stories that encourage reflection and inspire discussion. Thank you for joining us on this journey of justice and resilience. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in Megan's situation? Zora felt helpless before this horrible accident. A feeling of uncertainty. Do you think justice was served? Have you ever encountered someone whose intentions you questioned? Share your answers and any other thoughts in the comment section below. Let's discuss.